Chapter 1. It was a clean kill. The bolt struck the center of the turkey's heart. It lay limp, its plume of feathers still upright on its backside. Joanna Mercer lowered the crossbow and then emerged from her cover of rocks and bushes. The sun hadn't risen high enough in the east to fully light the west side of the mountain, but the sky lightened from black to a light gray, and it wouldn't be long before the summer heat was in full swing. Jo collected the bird, then slung the bow over her left shoulder and started her trek back toward the cabin. The trees provided shade, and a breeze passed through the mixture of oak and maple leaves, cooling the sweat on her tanned neck. Jo had kept her blonde hair short for the past 4 years, ever since her move off-grid. It was practical, comfortable, and she was long past trying to impress anyone. Jo maintained a leisurely pace on her walk home. She always enjoyed her time on the mountain before sunrise. The scenery was breathtaking. The view of the rolling Tennessee hills in the distance was a wonderful mixture of vibrant colors of untamed and untouched land. Most of the mountain ridge was still asleep. The earth itself still sluggish and still covered with the blanket of fog that provided the Smoky Mountains with its namesake. And as much as Jo enjoyed the view, she reveled in the mountain's silence. No cars, no phones, no distractions. It was the purest form of living Jo had experienced, but it had come at a great cost. Today marked the 4-year anniversary since Jo had been widowed. Her husband Danny had been driving home when he was struck and killed by a drunk driver. It was a cruel twist of fate that the driver survived, and while her husband's killer was sentenced to prison for life, it didn't replace what their family had lost. Jo had hoped that the court's conviction would relieve her pain, but it had only fueled an anger that she used to burn down her old life and journey into the wild to start a new one. Jo sold the house, cashed out all of her investments, and with Danny's life insurance policy, she purchased the 50 acres of untouched wilderness near the summit of Rebel Mountain. It was here, nestled amongst the trees and dirt at the top of the world, where Jo saw beyond the pain of the moment and the possibilities of a future. It had gotten easier to remember her husband after all of these years, and Jo saw Danny and their daughters every day. Her youngest, Amelia, carried her father's eternal optimism, while her oldest, Stacy, had his dark eyes and hair, along with that inquisitive and reserved gaze that always made it difficult to tell what he was thinking. A life off the grid had been an adjustment for everyone. None of them had the training for this type of life, and much of it was trial by fire. And while Jo was proud of the home that she had built, it had been a difficult journey. All of them had left behind the leisure and comforts of the modern world, and the separation from society had raised more than a few eyebrows. The few days of the month that she traveled into town, she was forced to see the community she left behind and the pity she avoided in her retreat. Most folks referred to her as the widow in the woods after she moved, and more than once she overheard the rumors passed around that detailed the loss of her mind. A part of her thought that was true. Jo didn't believe that a normal woman would choose to leave her job, her home, and pluck her 2 daughters from their schools and away from their friends. Looking back on it now, Jo realized how cruel it was for her to change their lives. But it was the only way she knew to survive. The old Joanna Mercer didn't know how to survive without Danny, and so she buried her past with him. And while the girls grieved for their father, Jo had also forced them to grieve for the life that she forced them to leave behind. The sun had burned away the early morning gray skies by the time she returned, and she moved carefully through the wooded area around her cabin, avoiding the trip alarms that she had installed, which helped ensure that her private property stayed private. Once past the tripwires, Jo emerged from the dense forest and into the small clearing where she had built her home. Jo had made the decision to build the cabin on the mountain's south-facing side. It provided the opportunity to enjoy both the sunrise and sunset, and shielded her from the brunt of the winter storms that were blown down from the north. In addition to the cabin, Jo also had a chicken coop, beehive, and garden that surrounded the cabin in a half circle on the western side. Jo peered into the coops, finding the hens awake and fed and the eggs already collected, which was one of Amelia's morning chores. The garden yielded enough vegetables for year-round consumption, so long as the right seeds were traded out before the seasons changed. Strawberries and green beans in the spring, and melons and squash in the fall. Any excess that they harvested were canned and stored for the winter or hard times. The bees hummed when she passed them, and Jo smiled. She had always loved bumblebees, ever since she was a little girl, and the bees had been one of the first purchases toward her sustainable off-grid living to help provide a source of income. In addition to keeping her garden fertile, she also sold the honey at the general store in the village. Between the chicken, the garden, the game in the forest, and the shelter of the cabin, Jo had everything she needed right here. The cabin itself was modest, built from the very trees that had been cleared on this patch of land. It held 3 bedrooms, a functioning kitchen, and a living room for leisure time. The roof was lined with solar panels that provided the needed energy to power the few electronics they possessed. A radio antenna protruded from the back of the house, which provided a connection to the sheriff's station via CB radio. And she had been forced to install a satellite dish so the girls could log into their online coursework for school. Jo curved around the front of the house, checking the rain barrels that collected the water from the top of the roof and funneled it down. The big 40-gallon drums were so full that they had overflowed into the dirt, creating a muddy circle around them that splashed the muck onto Jo's shin when she planted her boot near the barrel. There were 4 barrels total, which provided the needed water for their showering and gardening and cooking and drinking after it had been purified. And during any dry spells, there were 6 rivers that cut through her property. And because she was alone at the top of the mountain, the water remained unpolluted. Jo had wanted to install a toilet in the cabin, but she didn't want to deal with septic issues. So she settled for an outhouse behind the cabin with lime and enzymes. Jo understood that their way of life looked crude and strange to anyone from the outside. But those people didn't understand the truth of living out here. And that truth was as black and white as anything that Jo had ever known. Out here, on your own, you found out who you really were. And Jo had discovered that she was a survivor. Walking up the porch steps to the front door, the wind chimes rang a sweet and peaceful tune. Danny had made them for Amelia's 5th birthday, and she thought of them every time the wind glided through the trees. Bird and bow still in hand, Jo entered the cabin. "Emmy, you finished the rest of your chores?" She shouted the question as she shut the door behind her, but then stopped when she saw the decorations strung up across the living room ceiling. "Yep." Amelia stood beneath her handiwork, smiling so bright that her cheeks had turned red as she rose on her tiptoes. "Do you think Stacy will like it?" The happy birthday decorations were homemade, the letters crooked and not all the same shape or color, and the streamers and ribbons that curled at the ends swayed from the ceiling next to the banner. Jo set the bird down on the kitchen counter, flattening the feathers as she walked to her daughter. You know that Stacy doesn't like to make a big deal about her birthday." In fact, Jo had been surprised when her eldest daughter had called her to tell her that she would be coming up to the cabin for her birthday. She hadn't visited since she left for college last fall, and the pair had barely spoken. Disappointed, Amelia lowered herself from her tiptoes and slouched. "I know." She looked up at the streamers and the sign that she had made. Do I really have to take them all down? It was clear that Amelia had spent a lot of time on it, and Joe knew that the girl's heart was in the right place. Why don't we just take down the streamers and leave the sign? Amelia lifted her chin, that bright smile making its triumphant return. Really? Joe laughed. Yes, now get to work. She stood and slapped her daughter's bottom. You still need to get your schoolwork done before your sister gets here. Amelia bounced around happily, leaping up and snatching the streamers from the ceiling, returning the paper to the crafts box in the living room. Joe went to work plucking the bird and kept a close eye on Amelia once she started her schoolwork. The girl was smart, but she had a tendency to daydream, causing the day's assignments to stretch into the late afternoon. Once Joe finished cleaning the bird, she disposed of the guts in the compost pile out back, then placed the plump turkey in the cooler, where it would remain until dinner tonight, and descended into the cellar through the kitchen door. It had been one of the more challenging projects of the house, carving deep into the earth and rock to remove enough space for the basement. But she was glad that she had taken the time to build it. The food that she had canned and set aside for those rainy days had come in handy more times than she could count. A hand-powered kinetic flashlight rested on the first shelf, and Joe used it to guide her down the pantry. All 4 walls were covered with shelves lined with a variety of canned meats, fruits, and vegetables that she had packaged herself. She had enough food down here to keep 3 people alive for at least a year, longer if they needed to ration. This, combined with the game and fish from the wild, meant they truly could survive anything, save for a direct hit from a nuclear bomb. Joe plucked some green beans, yams, and stuffing, along with some flour and a jar of apples, cinnamon, and sugar to bake a pie. Stacy had always loved apple pie, and Joe's mother had passed down a recipe to her that would give even the best baker a run for their money. She hoped the gesture would make up for the decorations that Amelia had put up, though Stacy had always been more forgiving to her sister than her mother. When Joe closed the pantry door on the floor of the kitchen, she set the supplies on the counter and then froze when she heard single gunshot to the south. Someone had set off a tripwire. Joe hurried toward the door, picking up the crossbow along the way. Emmy, get to the safe box now! She paused at the door, loading a bolt into the crossbow as she waited for her daughter to disappear into the safety hatch that she designed should they need a place to hide. Once Amelia was safe below, Joe donned a small pack that she kept by the front door, which she always did before she left the cabin, and hurried into the woods, chasing the lingering echo of the gunshot that the intruder had triggered. There was no reason for anyone to have made it this far unless they were looking for trouble. Joe had put up signs and a fence warning intruders that this was private property and that anyone that decided to trespass would be met with deadly force. Joe moved swiftly and quietly through the trees, her body trained to remain light and soundless even when she was moving quickly, side effects of hunting for the past 3 years. The long sleeves of her camouflage jacket and pants concealed the lean and sinewy muscles that were the product of life on the mountain. Nearing the location of the tripped alarm, Joe slowed. Her well-trained eyes scanned the woods, looking for movement between trees. Heavy footfalls sounded to her left. Whoever was coming wasn't making any effort to hide it, and Joe circled around so she could sneak up on the trespasser from behind. The man never saw her approach, and he jumped when she spoke. "Don't move," Joe said. The man froze mid-step and gently placed his hands out on either side of him, and he started to turn. "I'm sorry, I said don't move." Joe barked the order even louder, and the man froze. "Didn't you read the signs on your way in? I'm well within my rights to shoot." "I'm sorry," he said. Joe adjusted the crossbow in her hand. "Turn around, slow." The man did as he was told, and when the intruder faced her, the man looked more like a tourist than a thief. She got a better look at him, and judging from his attire, she didn't think he was carrying. "What do you want?" "My car broke down," he answered, babbling and stumbling over his words. "We're on vacation and I'm lost and I can't get my reception on my phone. If you could just let me use your phone or—" "There's a town a few miles down the road. Talk to Sheriff Turner. He'll help you." The man smiled and waved a hand. Thank you so much, but, do you have any water?" He pointed to where he thought the road was. "My family is back at the car and we had planned on stopping for breakfast, but—" Joe lowered the crossbow. "I'll follow you." On the walk back to the road, Joe maintained a safe distance between herself and the man. While he wasn't a threat now, it didn't mean that he couldn't turn into one. But when they reached the road, the car stuck on the street confirmed his troubles. Joe saw the two kids in the back seat and the worried look on the mother's face. They were all nervous, and Joe knew that it had been desperation that had pushed the father into her land. Joe offered the water from her pack to the father, and the gesture brought a smile from both parents. "Thank you." He handed the water to his boys in the back seat, but Joe noticed that the woman remained guarded. "You live out here by yourself?" she asked. "No," Joe answered, choosing not to expound on any further information, then gestured to the vehicle. "Did you run out of gas?" She knew that there weren't many stations between the towns that were strung across the mountain, and it was easy for non-locals to find themselves stranded. "No," the man said, crossing his arms and leaning back up against the car. "The engine just shut off out of nowhere." "Our phones, too," the woman said, then reached inside the car and removed one of the mobile devices, which were nothing but a blank screen, no matter how many times she pressed the power button. "Even the boys' tablets shut off." Joe frowned, then looked up and down the road. But she didn't find anyone, which wasn't surprising. The old road was so broken and worn down, most folks used the new bypass that went around the mountain instead of over it. But Joe knew that some of the GPS applications would still take motorists down their old country road to save time if the highway was busy. But the fact that all of their electronic devices had shut off. Joe retreated toward the woods. "I need to check on something." The mother frowned. "Do you know what's going on?" Joe hesitated because she had an inkling of what might be happening, but she couldn't be sure. She needed to check her more sophisticated devices. "I'll be back." She disappeared into the woods before they could ask her any more questions, and then sprinted to the cabin. Dozens of thoughts raced through Joe's mind, most of them circling the possibility of what she thought had happened. And if it did, that meant Stacy would be in danger. Joe returned to the cabin, quickly retrieving Amelia from the safe room. "What happened?" Amelia asked. "I'm not sure yet." Joe kissed the top of her head, and then moved into her bedroom, passing by the twin bed and to the pine dresser that she had forged last spring. She opened the top drawer and reached for the mobile device that she kept hidden and charged beneath her underwear drawer. It was an old flip phone, but it still worked. She opened the top and then pressed the on button, waiting for the screen to light up. Nothing. Keeping the phone in her hand, Joe moved to the living room, where Amelia still stood with a worried look on her face. "Mom, what's happening?" Amelia asked. Joe moved toward the CB radio by the back wall, where the old computer that Amelia and Stacy had done their homeschooling work on rested. A binder sat on top of the radio. It held the step-by-step instructions of how to use the radio along with the emergency frequencies, should she need to contact help. But when she flicked the dial to turn on the radio, there was nothing. Same with the computer. The dead click of the devices sat heavy in Jo's mind as she gathered her thoughts. Stacy wasn't scheduled to leave the city until mid-morning. She knew that her eldest daughter would recognize what happened, but she didn't know if she would be able to get out of the city before society broke down. "Mom?" Amelia asked. Jo looked behind her over her left shoulder. "Grab your go bag." Amelia hesitated for a moment, but finally went to her room. Jo went and collected her own bag, knowing that she would have to go into the city to retrieve her eldest daughter, because she knew that if the effects had reached all the way out here, then it had most certainly affected the city. And while Jo wasn't sure how it happened, she was confident that whoever had detonated the EMP would capitalize on their attack. Chapter 2. The carpet was old, years of prayer wearing the fabric thin, but it was the only item that Muhammad Pathan had kept while he fled his home. When he knelt on his mat, bowing in prayer to the east, he was connected to the very homeland that he swore to avenge. Once finished with his prayers, Muhammad lingered with his face buried in the carpet. It still smelled of his homeland, and with the familiar scent came a rush of memories. He remembered how Nadia grew red in the face when she had accidentally crushed the fresh dates that she'd brought home from the market, and how she started to cry when their father saw. She had expected him to scold her, but instead, he brought her onto his lap and wiped the tears from her eyes, reassuring her that everything was all right. Uzi Pathan had always been a kind man. Muhammad's father never raised a hand to any of his children, choosing instead to use every moment as a teaching tool to help his children learn from their mistakes and grow into a better person. Every day is a chance to become a better person than the day before, a holier person, a wiser person, someone who inspires others to grow as well. Muhammad opened his eyes and rose from his bowed position on the carpet, giving him a view of the concrete wall that comprised his tiny bedroom. Cracks crawled over the wall like spider webs, and a bucket collected water from a leak in the roof. The crumbling building where Muhammad and his brothers had taken refuge was no home. No one sang in the evening before supper like his mother had, her sweet voice mixing with the delicious smells of her cooking that warmed their house. There was no laughter here, no joy. And while Muhammad remembered the teachings of his father, every day it became harder to remember what Uzi Pathan's voice sounded like. It had faded from him like the fibers of the carpet, worn down by time. Time had stolen much from Muhammad Pathan, and while he had tried denying the truth, he knew that deep down, Uzi Pathan would be ashamed of the man that his oldest son had grown to become. "Forgive me, father," Muhammad whispered. Revenge had soaked Muhammad's soul and mind in blood and darkness. It had made him strong, but bitter and resentful. It had sharpened his focus until it could pierce the armor that shielded his enemy. It had taken so long to plot his revenge, to gather the resources, the men, to lay out a plan that would bring the mighty Americans to their knees. But the enemy had not been what he had expected. The people that Muhammad saw were not fighters or warriors or demons. They were weak and small and ripe to be killed. They cared nothing of what happened beyond their small bubble. They only cared about themselves and the preservation of their lavish and obscene livelihood. And for Muhammad, he believed that to be an even greater sin than any other, the sin of indifference. Muhammad stood, his knees popping, stiff from the sleepless nights that had plagued him since they arrived in this foreign land. He rolled up his mat and then propped it into the corner of the room. His hand lingered on top of the fabric. It would be the last time he saw it, the last time that he prayed, the last time that he held on to any semblance of the life that he had known before today. Because like the day that destroyed his family all those years ago, it created a perfect and seamless division of what his life was like before that event and what life was like after that event. Today would provide another division from the man he was before he entered this room and the man he would become after he left. Muhammad had no delusions of making it out of this alive. All he wanted was to kill as many of the infidels as he could before he died. A knock at the door turned Muhammad's attention to his brother. Zaid was the only surviving member of Muhammad's family, and was only a boy when their family was murdered. And while Zaid was now a man, Muhammad still saw the scared little boy that clung to his leg after they were all alone. It had been the two of them, fighting for each other, protecting one another, doing whatever was necessary to survive. "The men are ready," Zahid said. "They wait for your command." Muhammad placed his hands on Zahid's broad shoulders. "Today, we will strike back into the heart of those that wronged us. Today, we will reap the harvest of the seeds that we have dutifully tended to for so long." Zahid's eyes watered. "Today, we shall have our vengeance." "Yes." Muhammad reached for the gold medallion that hung from Zahid's neck. It had been given to Muhammad by their father, but Muhammad gave it to Zahid after the bombing. It had belonged to their family for generations, passed down from father to son. He touched his forehead against his brother's, and the pair closed their eyes. "Today, we will strike fear into those that would try and destroy us. Today we will spill their blood into the streets, just as they did in our home." The pair lingered in silence, understanding the consequences of what came next. It was the end of their journey of this life, and the beginning of a new one beyond this mortal world. "From flesh to the dust that drifts to the heavens," Muhammad said. Zaid inhaled sharply. "To the heavens." Muhammad pulled back and then led his brother to the front of the small 2-bedroom apartment where they joined 10 other men. Hands worked deftly over rifles, cleaning the weapons in preparation for their mission. There were dozens of cells, just like Muhammad's, placed all over the country, both in cities and along the countryside. Most of the fighters had snuck through the Canadian border to the north, with falsified documents, like Muhammad and his men. Every cell had their own mission, and while most of their organizations were focused on the denser metropolitan areas, Muhammad would lead his men through the mountains, cleansing the rural areas of their enemy. Muhammad checked the time and then stared at the television, eagerly waiting for the signal. The room was barely furnished, save for an old couch and a few chairs that were used at the square collapsible table where they took their meals. They had no working air conditioning, and the water that spit from the tap had a metallic taste to it. The television was their only luxury. As the rest of the men finished assembling their weapons, one by one, they turned their eyes to the TV that played a local news station. None of them cared what the news said, or the fact that a woman sat behind the news desk where a man should be. But they all watched her with bated breath for the beginning of the end. And when the television screen went blank, silencing the room, Muhammad led his men out of the door. Now, after all these years, he would have his revenge. Chapter 3. The pounding in Stacy Mercer's head was followed by the sudden urge to vomit. She rolled from her side and onto her back, her arm bumping into something fleshy that made her recoil. She sat up in the bed and stared at the sleeping boy next to her. The headache intensified, and Stacy glanced down at her own nakedness, her memory shaky from the night before. She had come to a party off campus last night, invited by the boy who lay next to her. She had thought that he had liked her, and last night those suspicions were confirmed. Not wanting to wake him, Stacy quietly slipped out of the bed, dressed, and just before she was about to leave, the sudden impulse to vomit flooded through her, and she rushed toward the bathroom. Stacy shut and locked the bathroom door, then dropped to her knees just in time to puke into the toilet. The vomit burned her esophagus, and the mixture of all the alcohol she consumed the night before was emptied in 3 gut-wrenching heaves. Her stomach cramped when she was finished, and she leaned against the bathtub and shut her eyes. Last night had been an attempt to celebrate her 19th birthday and forget the 4th anniversary of her father's death. She hadn't celebrated since before her father's passing, but for the first time since his death, she could drown her pain until the memories were blurred and she was numb. Now she was paying the price for her debauchery, and she lingered on the cold bathroom tile until she was sure the lurching in her stomach had passed. Stacy didn't dare look at the contents of the toilet before she flushed, already turned off by the sour stench that filled the bowl. She closed the toilet, flushed, and hovered over the sink, which she gripped on both sides, head hung low, eyes shut as she tried to get her bearings. Tequila, bad. Stacy spat into the sink and then turned on the faucet, cupping her palm beneath the spigot. But instead of water, there was nothing but a groan from the pipes. She frowned and then tried the hot water nozzle. Still nothing. Stacy grimaced and smacked her lips, the sour taste of vomit still on her tongue. "Stacy!" The voice was soft, like the knock that followed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I'll be out in a minute." Stacy turned back to the mirror, almost not recognizing the haggard, tired face staring back at her. She took a few breaths and then stepped out of the bathroom, finding the boy sitting on the edge of his bed in his boxers. "Hey." "Hey." The smile he wore was genuine, and he extended a bottle of water to her. "I keep all my water at room temperature for hangovers. I learned last semester that cold water doesn't sit well with an already uneasy stomach." Stacy took the water, but didn't reciprocate the smile. "Thanks." She drank half the bottle, feeling a little better after she did. "So," the boy said, rubbing the back of his head awkwardly, "would you want to go and grab some breakfast or something?" "I actually have to go," Stacy said. "I'm meeting my family." "Oh." The boy shrugged it off, pretending it didn't hurt. "Of course." Stacy kept the water and left the room. Once she was out of the apartment, guilt flooded her veins from her hasty retreat. But sleeping with him last night was only to provide a distraction. Outside, Stacy squinted from the harsh brightness of the sun, and even though it was still morning, the heat was already sweltering. The concrete would bake them all by mid-afternoon. With her head still pounding, Stacy regretted promising Amelia that she would come up to the cabin for her birthday. She hadn't spoken to her mother since the beginning of the year, and the thought of seeing her again only made her anxious. Her birthday had always been bad luck. It felt wrong to be mad at her father for dying on her birthday. After all, it wasn't his fault. It was a freak accident. Some guy got drunk behind the wheel and then decided that he could make it home without any trouble. But he was wrong. A few miles down the road, and one red light later, and he T-boned the driver's side of her dad's truck. Her father was killed on impact. Stacy remembered how her mother looked when she got home. She had expected to find her father at the door. So many balloons in his hand that she couldn't even see his face. It was one of her father's birthday traditions for the girls in his life. But there were no balloons that day. Joanna Mercer walked through the door alone that evening. The color had drained from her cheeks, her hair frizzy and greasy and raked back from all the time she had run her hands through it, the way she did whenever she was overwhelmed. Jo moved through the doorway like a ghost, leaving it open behind her. She walked toward Stacy in a trance, mumbling nonsense over and over to herself. Stacy had to stop her mom from walking right into her. She remembered how light she felt in her hands, as if her mother would dissolve right between her fingers. Finally, Jo looked to Stacy in the eye, and a cold chill caused her heart to thump 3 heavy beats. And she thought it stopped for a second when she said, "He's dead." And with those words, Stacy would never again think of happiness and balloons on her birthday. Instead, she would only remember the trip to the hospital with her mother, because Joanna Mercer couldn't bear to identify the body by herself. She remembered looking at the mangled corpse on the steel table and thinking to herself, "That's not my father. That can't be. My father doesn't look like that." But it was her father. Stacy nodded to the officers, and Joanna Mercer only shivered, unaware of anything that was happening around her. For the first time in her life, Stacy got a taste of what it was like to be a parent, having to take care of both her mother and her sister until her aunt arrived the next day to help. Stacy spun around and glanced past the downtown skyline and toward the mountain ridge that had once been a prison for her. Even now, staring at the earthy greens and browns of the mountains rolling toward the horizon, a sense of dread gripped her. Dread from seeing her mother and returning to the cabin. Stacy kept her head down on the walk back to campus, staring at the pavement to shield herself from the harsh reflections of sunlight in the storefront windows that she passed. She searched for any restaurant that was open, but most stores were still closed. Her hangover demanded food, but she would have to wait until she returned to her dorm and hoped that Melissa hadn't eaten all of the snacks. When Stacy reached a crosswalk, she found the button on the light pole and pressed it. But when she glanced across the street, she saw that the walking sign was blank. She frowned and pressed the button again. Still nothing. Stacy checked both sides of the street, looking for any cars, and found 2. Both of them were stopped in the middle of the road, hoods up, the drivers staring down into the engines and scratching their heads. Stacy glanced up at the streetlights and saw that they were blank just like the crosswalk sign. What the hell? Staring at the stranded motorists, she crossed the street and removed her phone. It was dead. A thought pricked in the back of her mind. Something that her mother had told her long ago. Something that had sounded crazy at the time. No. Stacy shook her head defiantly. No, that can't be it. But despite the denial, she hastened her pace back to campus. She needed to be sure before she let her imagination run wild. But along the way, Stacy noticed other things, little things. There was no buzz of electricity coming from the power lines alongside the road. She heard no hum of AC units from between the buildings of the businesses that she passed. 20 minutes after Stacy left the apartment building downtown, she stepped beneath the brick arch of the university, but not before quickly glancing back to the city behind her, a town that had grown eerily calm and still, even for a Sunday morning. The campus was barren and empty. Most students had gone home for the summer after the spring semester ended last month. With the students gone, the old brick buildings looked more like ruins of some abandoned civilization than a school. For those that stayed, it was still early enough on campus for most folks to still be asleep, nursing their hangovers, or still drunk from a night out. Sundays were always sleepy days on the campus, even during the spring and fall semesters. It was her favorite time of the day. Because as much as she loved being around people, having friends again, and being able to use the internet whenever she wanted on her phone, the past 3 years on the mountain had shifted Stacy's heart just a little bit toward isolation. The residual effects of that off-grid lifestyle didn't completely wash away. Because on those lazy Sunday mornings, when most of the campus was still sleeping, she would walk out to the courtyard at dawn with a book or some assignment that she was working on and just enjoy the silence and the architecture of the campus. It was a beautiful place, and sometimes that was lost amongst the vapid conversations between students about parties, boys, girls, sports, and the latest social media craze. All these people sticking their arms out into the air to snap a selfie, or send a snapshot, or do whatever the hell all of those apps were capable of. Stacy had tried to get back into all of that when she returned to college, but so much of it felt empty. What was the point? Why did she need to take so many pictures of herself? Who cared what she was eating for lunch? But when the campus was quiet, on those Sunday mornings, Stacy would bask in the glow of what she thought college would really be like. Learning, growing, surrounded by people who wanted something more with their lives, providing a better future for them that they couldn't have accomplished had they not come to this institution. However, the image of college life that Stacy had constructed in her mind didn't exactly match up with her first-year experiences. The teachers weren't as inspiring as she hoped. Her peers weren't as cultured as she'd expected. And the boys weren't as experienced as she thought they'd be. It was the second month into fall semester when she had lost her virginity. She had been drunk. So had the boy. She had been so nervous, but when she touched him, she felt him tremble just as much as she did. It was a fumbling, awkward slapping of body parts that started quickly and ended even quicker. After he had finished, he flipped onto his side and fell asleep, but Stacy was wide awake, contemplating what she had done. She had never been one of those girls that fantasized about what her first time would be like, about finding the one to sleep with. That had probably been the most important lesson her mother had taught her, explaining the reality of sex and love and relationships. Still, it didn't calm the nerves from that first time. And that's why she had insisted on those 3 drinks before she worked up the courage to follow him into the bedroom. She remembered the door shutting with a distinctive thud that muted the sounds of the party still going on outside. Since then, Stacy had dated 2 other boys casually, but there was no real connection between them. It was nothing more than a sexual attraction that dulled after a few months when the excitement ran out. Like the boy from last night. Stacy reached the 3-story dorm building and took the stairs to the top floor. She removed her keys and fumbled them into the lock, swinging the door open so fast that it cracked against the wall and caused Melissa to wake from her slumber. "Ugh!" Melissa groaned, and then buried her face deeper into her pillow. "Don't be so loud!" Stacy flicked on the light switch. Nothing. She saw the digital clock by her nightstand blank. She listened for the air conditioning unit, but heard nothing. Panic was slowly replacing her hangover. "Melissa." Stacy walked to her friend's bed. She rattled her shoulder. "Melissa, wake up." Melissa groaned again, but finally rolled over, eyes squinted. "Why won't you let me die in peace?" "I need you to check your phone." Stacy hurried to her computer desk and pressed the power button on her laptop. She prayed that she was wrong and hoped that this was all just a coincidence. After all, her phone could have died. They could have had a power outage, something wrong with the campus utilities. But as her computer screen remained blank, that hope vanished. "My phone is dead," Melissa said. "Oh, God." Stacy pressed the heels of her palms against her temples, pushing harder and harder against her skull. She shook her head. This can't be happening. Are you going to throw up? Melissa asked. Do it in the trash can if you are. No. Stacy lowered her hands and took a deep breath. But we need to go. Melissa tittered. You can go wherever you want, but I'm going back to sleep. Stacy moved to her closet and then opened the door, which acted as a full-length mirror. You need to pack some clothes and grab any food, water, and medicine that you have. She pushed aside her clothes and junk and reached inside the back of the closet, stretching her arm into the abyss of the darkness, and felt around for the strap of her backpack. She hadn't touched it since she arrived at school, but she knew everything inside would still be useful, maybe save for the food rations. Melissa was sitting up now, shaking her head in confusion. What are you doing? It was a care package from my mom. Stacy dusted off the top and then opened the main compartment, then lowered her voice. At least as much of a care package as someone like her could give. She reached inside and removed the small camping pack that would provide shelter and a means for her to create a fire. But the only thing that she wanted to find was nestled at the bottom, encased in a leather sheath. Oh my God! Melissa stepped closer to get a better look. You've had that in your closet this whole time? What the hell do you use it for? Stacy rotated the 5-inch survival blade in her hand. It had a nice weight to it and was a full-tang blade, so there was never a fear that the knife would fall apart. The grip was a heavy-duty composite with ridges along the finger holds, so there was less chance that the blade would slip. And Stacy didn't have to touch the edge to know that it was sharp. Can I touch it? Wide-eyed and curious, Melissa stretched out her hand, but Stacy sheathed the blade before she got close. No. Stacy returned the contents of the pack to the main compartment and zipped it up, but clipped the blade to the belt loop of her jeans. Do you have any cash on you? Stacy knew that there were 5 $20 bills hidden in a secret compartment in the bag. I think so. Melissa grabbed her purse off her desk and counted the bills in her wallet. I've got like $30 and some change. She shook her head, tossing the purse on the bed. So are we not going to talk about why you have a serial killer blade and some secret army backpack hidden in your closet? Her eyes widened with fright. Are you going to kill me? Is this some kind of long con? Some secret undercover mission? Do you work for the government? Stacy grabbed Melissa's shoulders, and the girl stiffened beneath her grip. Melissa, something has happened. Something awful. Now I know that your parents are in Connecticut, so there's no way that you're going to make it that far. But you can come with me to my mother's cabin. Melissa shrugged Stacy's hands off of her. You're crazy survivalist, Mom. Are you nuts? I thought you said you hate her. Stacy hadn't realized how much she'd told her roommate over the past year, but she realized that it might have been too much. When she first came up here, she was still bitter, and the freedom and booze had given her loose lips. The power is out, Stacy pointed to the phones in her computer. We don't have any more communication, and pretty soon people are going to start freaking out once they realize the power isn't coming back on. Melissa frowned. What do you mean the power isn't coming back on? It's probably just... Melissa. Stacy stepped closer, her voice dropping an octave. The world is going to start collapsing soon, and if we don't leave the city now, we'll be buried under the rubble. Melissa swallowed. What do I need to bring? Stacy helped Melissa pack, keeping the girl to the essentials and what she could only store in her backpack. Why can't I take my duffel bag or my suitcase or... We're going to have to hike all the way to the cabin. It's at least half a day, and you won't want something in your hands to slow you down. Stacy had gone on enough hikes with her mother to know that was true. A few pair of clean clothes, hiking shoes if you have them. Stacy walked to the window of their dorm room and peered out into the early morning dawn of the campus. Hardly anyone was awake, and if she were lucky, it would stay that way. Because once the bulk of the city realized that their phones and cars didn't work, and that the food in the fridges would spoil within a few days, and when their toilets wouldn't flush anymore, the shit and anger building up in their homes would spill into the streets. And then the real chaos would start. And for the first time since her father died, Stacy was gripped with fear. Not the childhood fears that most people outgrew. Real fear. The kind that hollowed you out. The type that ate away at your consciousness, leaving you susceptible to attack. It was paralyzing. She was right, Stacy said. Still looking out the window, Melissa continued to pack, only half listening as she fought between which blouse to bring with her. Who was right? My mother. Stacy's own words were flung back at her by the window. She turned back to Melissa. We need to go. Okay, just hold your horses. Melissa finished packing her clothes, and Stacy had her bring all of the water and snacks that she had stored in the room. Do you have tampons? Stacy asked. Melissa blushed. I'm not on my period. If you have them, bring them. Stacy lifted her pack from the ground and slipped her arms through the straps. You might not be able to find any more where we're going. And following her own advice, she plucked a packet of tampons from her drawer and then headed into the hallway. Will you slow down? Melissa asked, jogging to catch up with Stacy as she reached the stairwell at the end of the hall. Stairs? Really? Power is out, Stacy answered. Elevators won't work. The stairwell echoed from Stacy's footsteps on her descent, and again she waited at the bottom of the stairs for Melissa, who was already out of breath. Stacy opened the door, but then Melissa groaned from the sunlight spilling inside. I left my sunglasses upstairs, Melissa said. Stacy kept the door propped open. We don't have time for you to run back up and get them. Melissa flapped her arms at her sides, exasperated. So what do you want me to do? Just walk all the way to your cabin with my eyes closed? Melissa, enough! Stacy spun around, the door closing behind her, and stomped her foot on the ground. We have a long way to go, and I'm not going to be able to stand you complaining the entire way. Melissa glanced down at her toes, twisting at the waist. She looked like Amelia whenever she was upset about something. I'm just not used to all of this. Stacy exhaled, realizing that she was letting the nerves and the sledgehammer-like pounding of her head shorten her patience. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so bitchy, Melissa asked, her words poignant, but the grin that followed softened the blow. Stacy reciprocated the smirk. I was going to say irritable, but fine. Yes, bitchy. She slackened her smile. I know it's hard to understand what's going on, but my mother always told me that if an EMP were detonated, that people would lose their minds. I'm beginning to think she might be right. What's an EMP? Melissa frowned. Electromagnetic pulse, Stacy answered. It's an invisible blast that fries electronics within its blast radius. You can't see it, or hear it, or feel it, but you're able to see everything that it does to the world once it's finished, like now. She opened the stairwell door. Listen. After half a minute, Melissa shook her head. I don't hear anything. Exactly, Stacy said. No cars, no planes, no hum of power lines. It's all gone. Melissa's complexion lightened. Jesus. Stacy glanced out the cloudless sky and then gestured up the stairs. Get your sunglasses. I'll wait for you down here. Melissa didn't smile like Stacy thought she would, and instead turned around with a stoic stare and hurried up the steps. Stacy lingered at the stairwell, still in awe of the deafening silence. It reminded her of her time on the mountain, though at least there she could hear the wind through the trees, birds chirping, and the wind chimes on the front porch. as much as she begrudged her mother about leaving her friends and their entire way of life in the rearview mirror. She never told her mother that she had grown to enjoy the nature and solitude of the mountain. But she let her pettiness get in the way of reconciliation, and even now she was still too bitter to admit to herself that she had treated her mother too harshly. But she made excuses for herself. Her dad dying on her birthday went a long way. Melissa returned wearing her shades, the sun reflecting in the black mirrored lenses. "Okay, now I'm ready." Stacy smiled at Melissa. It had been a long time since she had been able to have friends. Surprisingly, not many teenagers wanted to come up to the forest and visit a cabin that had no power, no television, and no real forms of modern conveniences. Compared to a 16-year-old girl who owned 2 phones, a car, and had access to Daddy's credit card, the cabin might as well have been on the moon. "Let's go." Stacy opened the door, but only made it one step out of the stairwell when 3 quick pops echoed in the air, freezing both girls in their tracks. The sound was distant, ricocheting between the buildings of downtown, and onto the open air of the campus. Melissa stepped forward, frowning. "What is that?" The noise hollowed Stacy's gut. She had spent enough time hunting with her mother to recognize those sounds. When the gunfire popped again, it was closer, and Melissa stepped backward, reaching for Stacy's hands as her breathing accelerated from fear. "Stacy?" Melissa asked. "We need to move," Stacy answered. "Now!" Both girls broke out into a jog, the gunfire growing more frequent. And it didn't take long before screams pierced the silence between gunshots. The cries were distant, like the gunfire, but their anonymity provided an added element of horror, like being locked in a room and hearing someone tortured through the walls. She wanted to get out of this place. She wanted to leave. But when the first explosion echoed from downtown, Stacy was afraid that it was already too late to escape. Chapter 4. Jo adjusted the rifle on her shoulder. She had chosen the gun over the crossbow for the trip. It was more practical to defend herself with than the bow. In addition to the weapon, Jo had her day pack on her back, filled with rations, a first aid kit, and other necessities should her trip take longer than she expected. The walk to the village was slower than Jo wanted. The family of 4 that had hitched their wagon to her caravan wasn't used to traveling so far on foot, especially the boys, both of whom looked barely out of kindergarten. But Jo swelled with pride as Amelia was able to keep pace, and she did an excellent job helping keep the boys distracted on their walk. Hearing the way that Amelia was interacting with the other kids, Jo couldn't help but feel that she had robbed her daughter of a real childhood. Instead of playing with dolls and having sleepovers, Amelia was learning about gun safety and how to reach the proper acidic levels to preserve meat in jars. "Hey." Tim appeared alongside Jo, snapping her out of her regrets. "How much further?" Sweat filled the creases of his furrowed brow as he squinted from the sun. His attire wasn't designed for hiking. None of his family were prepared for the long walk. "Not far," Jo answered, keeping her eyes forward and her rifle at the ready. "Okay." Tim faced forward again and plucked the sweaty collar that was glued to his skin. "I can't believe how hot it is already." "It's summertime," Jo said. "I know, it's just—" Tim laughed. "I thought I'd be at the river by now, tubing or something." He smiled at Jo, but she didn't return one to him, and he cleared his throat. "So, do you know what's going on? Why phones won't work? Why the car wouldn't start?" "I'll know more when we reach the village," Jo answered, ending the conversation. It was another 30 minutes before Jo saw the rooftops of the small cluster of buildings that comprised the village. It was one of 3 communities along the mountainside, and it had been where Jo had raised her family until her husband's death. The village was of 3 toes that had survived the collapse of coal mines in the 90s. It wasn't until 10 years ago that the tourism trade boomed, bringing people from all around the country to their sleepy mountain. It had sparked a renaissance of sorts, breathing life back into the struggling townships. But it also brought people, more people than Jo had wanted to deal with, and there were more showing up every season. And while Jo wished that the tourism trade would slow down, she hoped that when she turned the final curve of the mountain road that gave her a clear shot into town, that she would find everything still in its proper place. Because while the tourists were inconvenient, an EMP was deadly. When the rocky side of the mountain finally cleared, Jo slowed to a stop at the sight ahead. Cars were stopped along the small 2-lane road that ran through the heart of town. Everyone out of their cars and checking their engines. Some of the vehicles had knocked into one another, but the damage was minimal. From the crowded street, it looked like every resident of the village had come outside. Everyone asking the same question that Tim had asked her on the way down. What happened? Jo stopped the group, instructing Tim and his family to rest under the shade. I'm going to speak with the sheriff. She then turned to Amelia. Come on, Em, let's go. Can't I stay with them? Amelia asked, a slight whine in her voice. We really don't mind. Nicole, Tim's wife, stepped forward. Honestly, she's been a lifesaver with the boys. Amelia smiled hopefully at her mother, but Jo shook her head. She wasn't comfortable leaving her daughter with strangers, no matter how friendly they seemed. No, come on, Amelia. Okay. Amelia hung her head low, waving goodbye to the boys on her way past. Bye, Colin. Bye, Freddie. Both boys waved in unison, speaking at the same time. Bye, Amelia. In town, Jo kept away from the crowds, not wanting to draw attention to herself. But a few of her old neighbors had spotted her, whispering to one another about the famous widow of the woods. After isolating herself from the communities, she had developed a reputation on the mountain as a bit of a snob. Because she left, people assumed that she thought she was better than everyone else. But that wasn't true. Jo had only wanted to be alone with the family that she had left. The village was the highest community on the mountain, and the most populated due to the beautiful scenery that the elevation provided. And despite the tragedy that forced Jo to move from the area, there were times, though few and far between, where she missed the life that community offered. It was a quaint town, the picture-perfect image of what small-town America looked like on a postcard. And despite the steady influx of visitors that Rebel Mountain received each year, those charged with the preservation of the mountain had done a fine job. The core of the original town structures remained in place, and all of the shops, businesses, and bed and breakfasts that had sprouted from the economic boom stretched the length of the mountain road. And while it now had all of the modern businesses of a much larger town, it had maintained the quaint, small-town look. All of the new construction that happened had to meet a certain style requirement, and the board that oversaw the efforts had chosen the village to resemble that of a village in the Alps, with the cottage-esque style pitched roofs and windows. Boardwalks lined either side of the road and the storefronts as people passed shops, businesses, and small bed and breakfasts. The crown jewel was the picturesque church at the town center, complete with a large bell tower that protruded high above. It was one of the first structures built when the town was founded. The church had been restored and had become a popular location for destination weddings. It was where Jo and Danny had gotten married. Just one more reminder that Jo couldn't take any longer after her husband passed. They're not dangerous, Amelia said, as they neared Mag's store. What? Joe asked, eyeing 3 people she didn't recognize across the street. They'd been following her since they entered the town. "Colin and Freddie," Amelia said. "They're just scared is all." Joe glanced at her daughter, who stared up at her with those big, beautiful brown eyes, long eyelashes that could flick away worry with a single blink. "I know they're scared." Joe knelt and brushed Amelia's thick bangs off her forehead. "And that's sweet of you to try and help them. But remember what I always tell you. We have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of someone else," Amelia said, repeating the mantra that had been drilled into her head. "That's right," Joe said. "We do, and that means making sure that Stacy is all right." "Okay." Joe entered Mag's store, finding the friendly woman in the same place where she'd always be at the start of her business day, sitting behind the counter with her old manual cash register, the kind that still had the lever and forced you to add things manually, unwrapping her bills and getting ready for her customers. Life after Danny's death had been difficult, even after Joe had moved her family off-grid. And while most of the town had forgotten her, Maggie Johnson had remained a close and loyal friend. During her early days at the cabin, it had been through Mag's store that she was able to have supplies delivered, and it was also where she was able to sell her honey. "Joe!" Mags grinned from ear to ear, creasing dozens of smile lines along her face, the kind that so many women her age tried to hide. But at 58, Maggie Johnson had no issues with her aging body. She'd always said that it was a privilege to grow old, and the scars and wrinkles received along the journey provided stories to tell. "What brings you down the mountain?" "I wanted to ask if Em could hang out with you for the day," Joe said. "I need to head into the city and check on Stacy." Mag stopped counting the money and looked up at Joe. Those smile lines transformed into a frown. "Everything all right?" "Is your power out?" Joe asked. Mag nodded. "Here and at the house. Figured something happened to the station in the valley. I keep telling Mike that he needs to talk to the utility company about getting some of our lines replaced." Mike was their county's sheriff, whose station happened to be headquartered in the village. "Is your car parked around back?" Joe asked. "Same spot as yesterday." Mags stuffed the rest of the bills in the register, finished with her counting. "You need a ride?" "No, but I want to check something." "Come on." Mags slid off her stool and walked toward the back of the store. "I'll keep the close sign flipped for a little while longer. Won't hurt anything." Mag had an old Thunderbird that had belonged to her father. After he passed 5 years back, Mags inherited the vehicle. She had restored the car from top to bottom, but stayed true to the original components. Components that Joe didn't think would be affected by the EMP. "Here she is." Mag flipped the blue tarp off the vehicle, exposing the red and white Thunderbird, the large tail fins sprouted up in the back tipped with red lights. Compared to some of the other sedans on the road, the old Ford was more of a tank. Joe grabbed the keys and opened the heavy metal door. She sat down on the red leather seat and placed the key in the ignition. The engine cranked, and after kicking a half-dozen times, it finally caught. The big V8 rumbling and sputtering smoke from its dual exhaust. Satisfied, Joe turned the car off before it drew too much attention. She knew that working vehicles were going to be valuable in the coming months, and people would kill for it. She climbed out, shutting the door, and then helped Mags cover it back up with a tarp. When they were finished, Mags met Joe at the hood, her left eyebrow raised in question. "So, you gonna tell me what's going on? Or are you going to make me guess?" "The power's not coming back on, Mags," Joe answered. Mags waited for more, but when Joe said nothing, her face slackened from shock. Well, that's gonna cause some problems. I need to talk to the sheriff before I leave. Tell him what I know. And what do you know? Mag leaned in, more curious than ever. I think we were hit by an EMP. It's a blast that usually follows a nuclear detonation, but some have theorized that you can isolate the EMP component and set one off, rendering all electronics useless. And no electronic microchips means no basic utilities like water and power, sewage, no refrigeration to keep your food cold, no transportation, no communication, nothing. It's like living in the Stone Age. Mag studied Joe for a moment, the old-timer waiting to see if Joe was pulling her leg. But when there was no punchline, she only nodded. When I come back from the city, I'll make sure you're taken care of for looking after Amelia. Joe reached for Mag's hand. You have my word. Mag regained some of her optimism and gave a firm squeeze back to Joe. Don't you worry about me. I've survived on this mountain for longer than you have. Granted, I don't live all the way out in the bush like you, but I've gotten through hard times before. Joe had no doubt that the woman was a fighter, but even Joe was worried about what came next, and this was something she had prepared herself for a very long time. I should be back by nightfall, Joe said, and then turned to Amelia, giving her daughter a hug. You behave yourself for Mags, okay? I will, Amelia said, squeezing her mother tightly. Be safe. Joe planted a big wet kiss on her daughter's cheek. I love you. Love you too, Mom. Joe returned to the street, knowing that Amelia was in good hands. She trusted Mags, and that wasn't something many people had earned. On the way to the sheriff's station, Joe passed Rusty's auto shop, and she saw the big wrecker sitting on the side of the sagging garage. Joe turned back and knew that Tim and his family were still in need of help with their car. If Mag's old Thunderbird still worked, there was a chance the ancient wrecker might still be able to fire up, and she turned into the garage. Hey, Rusty. Yeah. The gruff answer came from somewhere in the back, and Joe saw the hunched back of the station's owner behind a stack of old tires. It's Joe. Hey, Joe. The gruff nature of Rusty's voice remained, but she heard the smile behind the greeting as he remained behind the tires. Everything all right? Gosh, dang it! Rusty straightened up quickly, his face red and sweaty, shaking his left hand and then examining the thumb. Stupid tire. He kicked the rubber, and his leg bounced back harmlessly. Rusty Bear was one of the few residents of the village that had been born here and would die here. He came from a long lineage of mountain blood, a point of pride for the man. His family was one of the original founding citizens, and they had stuck it out for generations, through the good and the bad. He was the youngest of 4 brothers who offered hunting and horseback riding expeditions on the mountain. Rusty stepped around the stack of tires, dressed in his usual blue jumpsuit, the clothes permanently stained like the man's hands. No matter how hard he tried to scrub off the grease, he just couldn't get rid of all of it. What's up, Joe? Rusty pushed up his hat, exposing the receding hairline, and planted his fists on either side of his rotund midriff. How is your old wrecker? Joe asked. Rusty scratched his head, squinting. Pop's got her in 73, brand new back then. Of course, there's been quite a bit of wear and tear on it since then. You need a tow? I thought you didn't have a car. I don't, Joe answered. But there was a family that got stranded on the road outside my property. If your wrecker is still in commission, I was hoping you could bring their vehicle into town. Of course. Rusty smiled, pushing his fat cheeks up the side of his face. Give me a minute here to finish up and I'll be happy to take care of it. Thanks, Rusty. The father's name is Tim, and go easy on him. He's not from around here. Yes, ma'am. The rest of the walk to the sheriff's station provided Joe the time to look around the town. It was the height of tourist season, and Joe knew that the big crowds would cause a problem. Anyone visiting on vacation wasn't prepared, and they would put a burden on those that were. Joe hoped that Mike was prepared for what came next. Sweating by the time she entered the sheriff's office, Joe was greeted with a few concerned citizens chatting up Deputy Moynihan, who looked ill-equipped to handle their complaints. He was the newest deputy and the youngest. "And how come my daughter's computer doesn't work?" The woman was Riley Kent's, a woman as rough as her last name sounded. She was dressed in socks and sandals, short bottoms that weren't doing her any favors, and a tank top that looked one wrong jiggle away from the deputy slapping an indecent exposure on her. "It's a laptop. It doesn't need to be plugged into the wall to work, and it had a full charge last night." Moynihan was clean-cut, his face freshly shaved, and his hair buzzed down to a nub. When he held up his hands to try and calm Riley down, Joe saw his underarms were already drenched in sweat. And so long as the temperature continued to rise, so would people's tempers. "Mrs. Kantz, we're trying to get in contact with the utility company, and we apologize that your daughter can't watch her Sunday morning cartoons, but right now, and my phone doesn't work either." Riley waved the impotent device around the deputy's face, the fat at the bottom of her arm wiggling from the movement. "How am I supposed to call my brother in Knoxville to make sure he gets his medication?" "Riley!" The voice bellowed with authority, and Sheriff Mike Turner stepped from his office. He was a tall man, a few hairs over 6 feet, a wide jaw that was currently clenched in frustration, and a pair of ice-blue eyes that bore right into Riley Kantz's soul. "I swear on my mama's grave that if you don't calm down, I will throw you in a cell." His voice boomed throughout the precinct, even startling Moynihan, but it produced the desired effect of piping Riley down. The heavy-set woman pocketed the phone and tilted her chin up, indignant. "Fine, but I expect something to be done by tomorrow, or you won't be counting on my vote for re-election next year, Sheriff." She turned, arms swinging as she practically goose-stepped her way out the door. Moynihan exhaled and slouched. "God almighty, that woman is one hot bag of air." "She's all bark." And just like the flick of a switch, Mike had calmed, his demeanor no more menacing than a crate full of puppies. When he saw Joe standing inside, a smile graced his lips, and it grew wider as he walked toward her. "Joe, what are you doing down here?" "I need to talk." Joe walked past him and headed toward the office. Mike's heavy footsteps followed and then closed the door, sealing the pair in privacy. "You want to sit down, or—" "I don't have time," Joe said. "I think the country has been attacked." Mike walked by his desk, but stopped. He crossed his arms, frowning. "Attacked by who?" "I don't know," Joe answered, "but I know what they used." Joe gave Mike the short version, making sure that he understood what was happening and how people's complaints about laptops and phones were about to be the least of their worries. "This isn't something that's going to be fixed in a week, a month, or even a year," Joe said. "And if this was a nationwide strike, it could mean a complete collapse of the government, infrastructure, and the rule of law." Mike's stare hardened. "Not in this county." "It might not be up to you." Joe stepped closer to him, and she caught the scent of his soap. He smelled nice. "You need to get people ready for the long haul. First priority will be food, water, and any medications that people might need. Talk to Mags down at the general store. I left Amelia there with her. She should have some supplies stockpiled. But people will start to panic if they think this will last for a while, and then they'll start to loot." Mike nodded and ran his big palm behind his jaw. "Well, it explains why all the systems are down, and our squad cars." "Any vehicles that were made before 1980 should run," Joe said. That was before fuel injection had processors in them to make them more fuel efficient. And it seemed for the first time, Mike noticed the pack and the rifle. "What's all this?" "I'm heading to the city," Joe answered. "I need to get Stacy out of there before things get worse." Mike raised both eyebrows. "You're going alone?" Joe tossed him a sideways glance. "I can handle myself." "Joe, it's not about that." Mike closed the rest of the space between them, cupping his hands beneath her elbows with the lightest touch. "You don't have eyes in the back of your head." A lump caught in Joe's throat, but she quickly cleared it and took a step back. "I'll be faster on my own." She turned for the door and then opened it, finding Moynihan pretending like he wasn't just eavesdropping. But she turned back to Mike and her eyes watered. "Watch out for Amelia." "Of course," Mike answered. "You have my word." And like Mag's, Mike's word was another she trusted.